I first developed encephalitis in January 2015. So before that, I was a 40-something-year-old woman, mid-40s, married to Alan. Life was encompassed with work and enjoying ourselves, travelling a lot. Work was a big part of my life, and I probably actually didn't really appreciate how important it was till it was threatened to be taken away from me, actually. I worked as a deputy charge nurse in the same intensive care unit at that point for 25 years. I was also the education facilitator. I was involved with doing rehab with post-ICU patients. So life was really busy, and some say I, maybe did a bit too much with work, but it was a huge part of my life, and actually didn't probably really appreciate how important it was in my life until the point that I couldn't go to work anymore. I can remember very clearly when I first started to feel unwell. It was January 2015. I had just come in from a run. I was starting to train again, having had a break at Christmas and New Year. And I'd just come in a shortish run. It was the first one. And I went over to the telephone, and I started having palpitations just out the blue. Never experienced anything like that. And then, a couple of days later, it came back, and then I started to feel dizzy and nauseous, and then I had a tingling down my right arm, which then over the course of several days went up into the right side of my face. And I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what. I also started to emotionally feel a bit different. I thought it was related to my age, and it was start of menopause symptoms because they're very similar. I'd get upset with things. I started to become paranoid, and I had sought help at this point. After that, I ended up one night at work the palpitations got really strong and really worse, and actually had somebody check me out at work. And then the next day, so I was still working night shift at this point, I came out of night shift, went to bed, got up, had a bath after I got up, and I think the heat just made me feel really dizzy, and the palpitations were absolutely horrific. I was persuaded to attend accident and emergency, and I was checked out. I was sent home. Little did I know, actually, while I was in accident and emergency, I was actually having focal seizures. So the feelings I was having were actually seizures. Fast forward another maybe 5 or 10 days, and I had decided at that point I wasn't able to work because I felt dizzy. I didn't feel safe to drive. I stopped driving. I was very lucky that a colleague saw that there was something quite wasn't right with me, and got me an MRI scan. So I had the MRI scan, which flagged up I had a swelling in my hippocampus. I was then admitted to my local hospital where I work initially, and we went along the diagnosis of HSV, the herpes simplex virus, and I was treated for that initially for a couple of days. I had treatment, I had a lumbar puncture, and I found that quite difficult, being a member of staff and being in hospital and actually not having control over what was happening to me. I found that quite difficult. But this time I was quite paranoid, so I probably don't even appreciate how paranoid I was about certain aspects. A neurologist came along to the hospital I work in, luckily, and then there's several aspects of luck in my journey, and he saw me and reviewed me and said, oh no, we need to have this patient up in Glasgow. So the next day I was transferred up to Glasgow. My diagnosis, my blood test went to Oxford, and they took quite a period of time to come back. I was actually out on pass when I got my diagnosis, so I was allowed home under supervision. So I went round to my parents' house during the day, and then I would come home in the evening when Alan came home from work. But I was at home when I got my diagnosis, which meant I could actually start the treatment that I needed to start my recovery. And that was a period of 6 weeks from my first symptoms to diagnosis, which felt like a million years of time for me. But actually, when I've now since heard other people's stories, it was actually very quick. And I do believe that that is key to my recovery. I had to go through some neuropsychology assessments before I was allowed back to work, because my memory was obviously one of my biggest concerns. Stopping the seizures and my memory were probably the two things that were the most important to me. I was allowed back to do office work, and I was based in the office for quite a considerable amount of time. It was not quite a number of months. In fact, it was quite a huge amount of months before I was actually allowed back to work clinically, but I faced that in as well. And after 25 years, it's not like a duck to water, but I did manage to get back to my substantive role. So we're now at 2017 in September. I was attending and speaking at a conference in London, a critical care nurses conference. So I was speaking at that. We did a 5K fun run around London, which was just wonderful. I really enjoyed the experience of, could say that was one of my life goals. And I was actually about to go and speak, and I was just grabbing a little light lunch, and I started to feel palpitations and nausea. I went and spoke at the conference, and then that night I didn't feel great. We had a post-conference or a mid-conference dinner. I didn't have very much alcohol to drink, and the next morning I woke up with what felt like the worst hangover in the world, and then I felt more nauseous, and then more palpitations, and then I was thinking, oh, I think I know what this is, but I didn't really want to believe it, because I thought it can't be coming back. I actually went to work and interviewed with my boss the next day, 10 people, and by the end of it, I was utterly exhausted, and the palpitations were really strong, and I actually just admitted it. And he said, we need to get you sorted here and tested. By that time, Glasgow were doing LGi1 testing up in their centre in Glasgow, so I was able to get tested really quickly, and the results the next day, and started on treatment the next day. And then I got a lumbar puncture, and then I got immunoglobulin. And basically, without all the pre-workup from the first time, that when we were in an unknown diagnosis, we were really, really quick on it. So the second time it was much quicker. So now we're 6 years from where I was. I'm pretty much back to where I was at work. I work slightly less hours, but that's a good thing, because I'm older, and I have to accept that I'm actually older than where I was when we started this, and working part-time has its benefits too. We've started travelling again. We've done a couple of long-haul holidays. Unfortunately, COVID has put paid to our travels at the moment, but they're still in my head, planning for the future. And I'm exercising again. Life is good, and it's positive. I also now volunteer for the Encephalitis Society, and that's a hugely rewarding challenge that I took on a couple of years ago. I wanted to give back something that I had got, and I felt I was in a position to support other people. if somebody came to me who had encephalitis, or they knew somebody, obviously I would want to be able to support them. I would direct them to, first off, the Encephalitis Society website, which has developed even over the 6 years since I was first diagnosed. It's come a long way since then. The website's got a huge amount of information, and we also now have online support groups. There's a huge amount of research, and we know it is gold standard research with information on each different type of condition. So that's a great place to start. I would want to also offer that person hope that you know, it's scary. You don't know what's in front of you. It is a journey, but there is hope that everybody's recovery is different, and we can't say that two people are exactly the same. I consider myself very fortunate in the fact that I've made a wonderful recovery. Having good friends, family support is huge as well, and just take each day and each step at a time. But there are lots of people there and lots of resources to help you on that road to recovery. I bleated. I did bleat a lot about I wanted my old life back. I had a great life, as you heard at the beginning, and life was good, and I wanted that back. But I was never going to get it back because I'm a different person from the experience that I've had. But over time, I learned that that wasn't always a bad thing. I've learned a lot about myself. There is hope, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It's different, but it's not. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be positive, and I think I'm testament to that.